We have as our guest here as we are heading down the home stretch toward Election Day, Republican candidate for Congress in Arizona's District Number 1, former state lawmaker Jonathan Paton. Jonathan, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, guys.
Good to have you on. We appreciate the time. Let's start off by exploring the issue that is obviously on just about every American's mind today. And it's not, I would suggest to you, sir, not the election. It's the aftermath of a major natural disaster that has hit not just the state of New Jersey and New York and those areas, but arguably has impacted the entire country. What are your thoughts about how things are being handled by the federal government, Jonathan, and what do you see as the government's role in responding to catastrophic natural disasters like this?
Well, I think that the government absolutely has a role in that. I think that I've always believed, we provide for the common defense, and that's not just enemies, foreign and domestic, but it's also natural disasters. We have to do what we can collectively. I mean, that's why we formed governments in the first place, to collectively protect us from things like this from happening that we can't do individually. So I do feel that there's a legitimate role for the government. I think that there's also we all have to play a part in doing our fair share and making sure that the disasters that happen on the East Coast. We've experienced disasters in Arizona ourselves. I grew up in Tucson, Arizona, and we had major flooding and what we call the 100-year flood down there that devastated people, and then we had to make some decisions about floodplain issues, and we have to make smart decisions after that. But absolutely, we're all in this together as a nation.
Jonathan Paton, our guest here on the Mitch and Joe Show, candidate on the Republican ticket for Congressional District Number 1. John, just another quick question about this. I've seen estimates, early estimates, that the aftermath, the carnage left behind by Hurricane Sandy is going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of $10 to $20 billion. Does it concern you, given our current economic challenges, we'll put it that way, here in this country, that a price tag that high is going to in some way strain resources that are available through the federal government and through local and state governments?
Of course, it's going to be devastating, and I think that we're going to have to make some tough decisions, just like we are with the rest of our budget. We have a lot of items on the docket that we have to make tough choices over. I think we're going to have to take a hard look at some of the luxuries that we have and focus on the priorities. And infrastructure, those kinds of things should be at the top of the priority list, and some of the things that we can do without, we need to put those at the end of the list. And I think that also as a member of Congress, I need to look at our own state and the issues that we have. We end up sending more money to Washington, D.C. than we get back. And I also feel like we need to take a look at what the proper role, and you asked the question about the proper role of government, but I think we also need to know what's the proper role of the federal government as opposed to the proper role of the state and local governments. And I've always felt that the more money that we get back to our state, that our own legislature, our own members of the legislature are able to appropriate, is much better than giving that money to Washington, D.C., only to have it siphoned away by various agencies, and it doesn't actually get down to the people who might actually need it.
Republican candidate for Arizona's Congressional District 1, Jonathan Paton, is our guest live here on the Mitch and Joe Show. Open phones, 779-5954 in Flagstaff or Williams, or toll-free, 877-971-1051. Jonathan, is it appropriate under circumstances like this one, where we have a natural disaster event that has impacted so many millions of people and has arguably, and I heard this today, Joe and Jonathan, on the television coverage of this today, and it blew me away, that this might become the single most expensive natural disaster in American history, exceeding Katrina. Is it appropriate when things like that happen, and we have massive loss of life, to have any type of political discussion about predicating federal aid on offsetting budget cuts?
Well, at the end of the day, you do have to make decisions based on how much money we have available. But I do think that in the larger context, we're having to make those decisions and planning for disasters, those kinds of things. And I think that the concern that I have is this is obviously a priority. This is something that we have to worry about. I think that we have spent ourselves in such a corner at the moment that it makes it difficult for us to address our priorities. And I think at the end of the day, we're facing a natural disaster of a different magnitude, and that is, what are we going to do when people are going to stop underwriting our debt, and if everything completely collapses? And we're talking about life and death right now. And in the future, there may not be any more money left in the Treasury, and there may not be foreign investors that are willing to underwrite that debt to cover those natural disasters in the future. So we do have to make tough choices, but at the moment we have to protect our fellow Americans, and that's an obligation that we have.
Jonathan Paton, our guest here on the Mitch and Joe Show. And again, 779-5954 and 877-971-1051. Jonathan, there's a lot of smoke and haze in the air from the prescribed burns, and I think Mitch and I are both
of us
struggling with that just a little bit, so forgive me. I want to challenge you, though, on what you just said. You talk about this impending fiscal cliff. At least that's what you're alluding to when you talk about the danger of foreign investors no longer underwriting our debt. Yet you signed Grover Norquist's pledge.
Correct.
And that pledge, and let me just tell you let me just read what it says. It says that you promise, you pledge, you will, 1, oppose any and all efforts to increase the marginal income tax rates for individuals and or businesses, and 2, oppose any net reduction or elimination of deductions and credits unless matched dollar for dollar by reducing tax rates. Jonathan, that leaves 2 options for increased revenues into the government, which are going to help offset the debt and deficit. 1, drastic cuts to entitlement and or defense spending, and the other one is explosive, and I mean explosive, economic growth, so that the base grows far enough. And I don't even think, even with the rosiest outlooks, even with Romney's projections of the 15 million jobs his plan will create, that's going to make the appropriate inroads on our debt and deficit in order to get those things under control. If you've signed a pledge saying you will under no circumstances increase top marginal tax rates or allow for there to be loopholes or deductions to be closed unless they're offset by additional tax cuts, that seems to me a revenue-neutral formula at best into the federal government. How are we going to get our debt and deficits under control with that kind of reasoning?
Well, I think that we've spent too much, and I think that here's my belief: if you were to increase those taxes, that other issue that you brought up of growth would be impossible. I think that if you increase those, especially taxes on income or investment, I think that constrains the economy and it makes it impossible for it to grow, which means you're basically coming up with fewer taxpayers into the system. And so that's basically what that growth means. That means more taxpayers at the end of the day. I think that if you increase those revenues, you're going to be basically preventing job creators from creating new jobs, which creates new taxpayers. I think that constraining spending less. And here's the thing: there is going to have to be an attempt to work with the other side. We don't know how this is all going to turn out with the election. My hope is my candidate for president is going to win, and my hope is that Republicans are going to regain the Senate. But at the end of the day, in our own state, we had a Republican governor. We had a House and a Senate that were controlled by, or we had a Democratic governor, Janet Napolitano. We had a House and Senate that were controlled by Republicans, by my party, and we were still able to find a way to balance the budget at the end of the day. And we were able to do that with a balanced budget. We have that in our state constitution. You have to balance the budget every June 30th. And we made some of the biggest cuts in state history. And I felt that it was right to do that because we could not raise taxes in a recession. I never raised taxes when I was serving in the legislature, and I don't see why we should be raising taxes now if we can cut spending. And I don't think anybody in this country believes that there aren't a whole lot of things that we could cut, and I can be very specific with that. The office of the CBO is projected there were over 95 different recommendations that they made to the president that would dramatically cut spending and help stabilize things in this country. The president only took 4 of those up. He didn't explore the rest of them. I think that there's a lot of duplication. There's a lot of things that the state should be doing. There's a lot of things. Arizona right now for Medicaid, for example, is a model with our access system compared to other states. We're able to control costs much better in our own state than they are in other states, simply because we have a different model. We could dramatically reduce our costs, and I think that if we do raise taxes, we're going to reduce the number of people actually paying taxes. That's my ultimate feeling about that.
John Paton, we're talking with him. He's a Republican candidate for Congress in CD number 1. John, I'm gonna push just a little bit back on your assertion that increasing. You hear this argument a lot. You can't tax the job creators. There was a study.
I'm not saying you can't tax them.
Well, you can't raise taxes on them because
I'm saying that if you tax more than are already being taxed, they're going to. They're simply not, they don't pay those taxes. They're ultimately going to reduce their workforce. That's what I'm saying.
And I'm going to suggest to you that flies in the face of historical evidence, including a study just done by the Congressional Research Service that shows that the top marginal tax rates have steadily decreased since 1945, post-World War II. The few times that the top marginal tax rate has increased, we've seen economic growth, increases in budgets. That was during the Clinton years. Every other time that taxes have been reduced, there is, and this is the summary conclusive evidence. I'm going to read it to you. It's just a sentence or too long. It says, the evidence is not conclusive, however, to substantiate a clear relationship between the 65-year steady reduction in the top tax rates and economic growth. Analysis of such data suggests the reduction in the top tax rates have had little association with saving, investment, or productivity growth. However, the top tax rate reductions appear to be associated with increasing concentration of income at the top of the income distribution. Jonathan, having that much wealth concentrated at the top is not good for economic growth either.
Well, I don't know that, because I haven't seen the paper that you produced. All I know is Reagan dramatically reduced taxes. We had economic growth. JFK did the same thing. We've seen it. There is something called the Laffer curve, which there is a law of diminishing returns. The higher you raise taxes, the lower revenue you ultimately get. And I believe in the Laffer curve. I think it's also stands up to empirical scrutiny. And I'd love to see the report you're showing me or you're talking about, but I haven't seen it. So I don't know exactly who commissioned it or anything like that. And I'd love to read it, but I don't necessarily buy into the argument that I just know this. When you're talking about these top brackets, you're also talking about small business people that they have other tax shelters, et cetera, that they're able to escape anyway under the current system, and they'll find another way to get out from under it. I think that we need to focus on how can we put more jobs out there, and we can do that also not only by dealing with the tax code, but also with regulations that are on businesses right now that would bring jobs immediately to this state, which would create new taxpayers in Arizona. And I can specifically point to specific examples in Congressional District 1 that would do just that.
Go ahead and point to one. I'll give you a chance to do that.
I guess the best example is the Resolution Copper Mine. If we could just get this approved and to go through, we would have 3,000 jobs immediately in the state of Arizona. Every single one of those people would be paying taxes into our state. Every single one of them would be paying federal income taxes, and we would be able to increase. That doesn't cost the Treasury anything. They'd actually be paying for another parcel of land, paying into the Treasury another parcel of land, and we would be receiving income. Just with that one thing, the taxpayers would not have to foot the bill for that, and we would have new taxpayers tomorrow. That doesn't cause, you don't have to lower taxes, you don't have to do anything. All you have to do is for the government to get out of the way. That's in Congressional District 1 immediately. That affects everybody in the state and everybody in this congressional district.
Jonathan Paton is a Republican running for Congress in Arizona's District Number 1. He is our guest live here on the Mitch and Joe Show throughout northern Arizona on 105.1 FM, The Big Talker, at 4:32. I'm going to dip into the Facebook page here, Jonathan, for the next question. This is off of the Mitch and Joe Show Facebook page. This is from a fan by the name of Graham. He says that you've been running around telling people that Ann Kirkpatrick, your opponent in this race, voted for bailouts, voted for cap and trade, voted for cash.
I've never
for
said
clunker.
that. What
voted
I've
for
said
Don.
is
Okay,
while
clear
she
the
was
air.
in
Clear the
office,
air.
and if you watch the tape, I said that while she was in office, these different things happened. And they happened because she voted for Nancy Pelosi as Speaker. And I've never said that she voted for cap and trade, because she didn't. I never said that she voted for the bailouts, because she didn't. What I have said is that while she was in office, she voted for Nancy Pelosi, who put forward each one of these proposals. And she has voted for a lot of things I disagree with, but I've never said that. And if you watch the tape, it's pretty clear. I mean, they're very selective about the tape that they put out, but I've always been clear that while she was in office, these things happened, and she enabled that environment by who she voted for leadership of her party.
That being said, Jonathan, just to kind of keep on this for just a moment,
sure.
by suggesting that she enabled those votes when she did actually vote no against them, does seem to fly in the face of folks who say, look, you know, this gal here went to Congress and she voted against the same things that you would have also voted no for.
Except she voted for some things that she is selectively cherry-picking those votes, but she's also voted for things that I definitely would not have voted for, and that's what we've actually campaigned on. Mm-hmm. We've campaigned on our vote for the healthcare, the Obamacare bill. We've pointed out her vote for the stimulus, sure, which goes back to our debt question. We've pointed out her support for card check. We've pointed out her support for, well, really actually voting with Nancy Pelosi 87% of the time. So, absolutely, a stop clock is right twice a day. She's voted in a way that I would agree with from time to time, but to use that and to say that then she's a moderate is incorrect. She has made some very extreme votes, in my opinion, and that's why I'm running against her. And I think that's why she lost her position in Congress, and I think that's why she's going to lose in 2012 as well. Next Tuesday.
Yeah, right. That's true. Jonathan, here's another question off of our Facebook page. This is from Carla. Sure. She says that she's heard that you are against paid maternity leave for women, and she says true or not?
I'm against the Affordable Health Care Act. I've never said that I have a problem with paid maternity leave. I've opposed Obamacare, which has a lot of things in it. And it certainly is something I oppose collectively because I think it's a bad bill. But to say that I'm against every single one of these things individually is not correct. To say that I feel like it is way too much regulation in one bill is absolutely correct. And I think that is cherry picking one element that out of that bill. When you look at the totality of it, that's what I object to.
We're talking with Jonathan Paton again, Republican candidate for Congress and CD1, our guest here on the Mitch and Joe Show. And I want to change topics here for just a minute, Jonathan. For those listeners in northern Arizona who may not be familiar with your story, you are a veteran. You served this country. In fact, you had quite an interesting distinction as being one of the only people elected to the state legislature while you were in the midst of service to your country in a foreign theater, if I'm not mistaken. Do I have that right?
That's correct. I was serving in Iraq when I was reelected to the House. Yeah,
it really is an interesting story. And so, with all of the stuff that is happening overseas, we have, tragedies in Syria and Libya. We hear about threats of Iran possibly getting a nuclear weapon, and yet you can appreciate that so many of the American people are weary of our involvement over there in the Middle East. As a member of Congress, sure, where would you stand in dealing with some of those hot-button issues over there in the Middle East?
Well, first of all, I think that a mistake that we've made, and I've mentioned this on your show before, and I think this may be something different than maybe you've heard from other Republicans, but I really believe that the role of Congress in Article 1, Section 8, it clearly says that it is the role of Congress to declare war. Mm-hmm. And I feel, and I really believe this strongly, that Congress should have asserted that role in the last two conflicts, one of which I served in. I served in Iraq. But I do believe that we would have been better off militarily, and our soldiers would have been better off, if Congress had an actual vote to declare war in those conflicts, mm-hmm. because I think that would have forced us to fully vet everything involved with them. I would have to tell you that those votes, if they're in the affirmative or in the negative, that's simply the role that Congress needs to have. I think that anything that will actually turn into a war, an actual shooting war, I think Congress should be involved in making the declaration. I think in terms of Iran, I think that we have a country that is willing and has really invented the modern suicide bomber. They did that in the Iran-Iraq War, was the first known modern example of a suicide bomber. They did that, and they have a belief system at the top of their government in which they can achieve, basically everlasting life, etc., through killing themselves. When you have a country like that gets its hands on a nuclear weapon, you're facing a very altogether different threat than you had with the Soviet Union, which they believe that they certainly were self-interested. They didn't want to die. They were very pragmatic and practical about how they went about things. Mm-hmm. I don't think that's the same thing with Iran. I supported and sponsored the Iran Divestment Act in our own state, which said that we are not going to be investing any more of our funds in petroleum in businesses that do business with Iran. I think that we need to take a much stronger effort against them and do everything we can to prevent them from obtaining a nuclear weapon.
Yeah. Jonathan Paton, making the point about terrorist states not having that mutually assured destruction as a deterrent over there.
Exactly.
And it's a really solid point. We got a phone call from Chino Valley. Another Jonathan is calling in. He's got a question.
Jonathan's calling for Jonathan. Jonathan
in Chino Valley for Jonathan Paton on our guest line here. Jonathan, welcome to the program. What's your question for Mr. Paton?
Yeah, I just want to thank Jonathan for taking my call. I called in to Ann Kirkpatrick the other day, and she wouldn't take my call, which is kind of telling of her. But anyway, during her interview, the question was asked about the individual mandate. Would she support that continuing being in Obamacare? And she made the comment that it's not fair for rich people who can afford to pay health insurance, who don't have health insurance, and then go to the hospital and then don't pay the hospital. She made that comment as justification for the individual mandate, which is in Obamacare. And I personally was not a rich person going through college. I paid for it myself and worked full-time, went to college full-time. And there was a couple times when I had to go to the emergency room because I am very rambunctious and I got hurt. And I paid $20 a month until I paid the emergency bill off. And I take it very, very personally when Ann Kirkpatrick insinuates that I'm rich and that I don't pay my bills.
Is there a question in there somewhere, Jonathan?
Defunded and gone.
Okay, thank you, Jonathan Paton. You want to respond to what Jonathan from Chino Valley just had to say?
Well, the first thing I want to say is, and I wasn't able to listen to the show when Ann was on, but and I think you know this. I love calls and I love getting questions. So anytime, whether it's somebody agrees with me or disagrees with me, I think it's important that we hear people out, and I appreciate the caller. My belief is that the individual mandate was one of the single worst things in this bill. I disagree with the Supreme Court. I think it's unconstitutional to force someone to buy health insurance. I think that to me is unconstitutional. Now the justices may disagree with me because they called it a tax.
And they have in all fairness now, they have the final say on whether something is constitutional or unconstitutional in this country, and that's the way that the founders designed the system, correct?
Well, they in our system, they are the ultimate arbiters, but they've also reversed themselves, and that doesn't make them right.
Sure.
I mean, it does ultimately make them that they are the final. They have the final say unless they reverse themselves later. But they also, it was interesting. They did say the only reason why it is constitutional is because it's a tax, which everybody that voted for this strongly denied. And so if the argument is that this is constitutional because we agree with the Supreme Court, then it also has to be argued that this is one of the largest taxes in national history. And I think that because that's also what they said. And I mean, they don't have papal authority. They don't have the ability to say that they're infallible. But in our legal system, essentially that's the kind of authority we give them. Well, I look at it and this is a tax. We all knew it was a tax. The penalty if you don't buy that health insurance. And I think it's been devastating to people in this country, and I think it's really caused businesses to not hire new people, and I think it's causing people in this country to I think it's causing economic stagnation in America. And that is probably one of the worst parts of this in a wide panoply of things that I disagree with the bill.
We got another call. Phil from Cottonwood has a quick question. And, Phil, we're going to ask you to keep the question nice and tight for Jonathan Paton. You're on the Mitch and Joe Show.
Hi, guys.
Hi.
Hi, Mr. Paton.
Hello.
In Mr. Paton's defense, Joe quoted that study that said that, in general, tax cuts didn't work for creating revenue. That was a general study. I'd like to give a couple specifics of where it did work. When Reagan took office, the maximum rate was 70%. He reduced the maximum rate to 28%, as well as cut capital gains. The revenue to the Treasury created by the additional business activity doubled. Even during the first 6 years of the Bush administration, as much as everybody wants to hate those years, the revenue to the Treasury created by the tax cuts was up 60% in the first 6 years. Those are specifics. It does work. It always works if it's done properly.
Okay. All right. Thank you for your call from Cottonwood, Phil. And, guys, I will just tell you, because I don't want to belabor this point, there's a lot to talk about. This study was put out by the Congressional Research Service. The title of this study is Taxes and the Economy, an economic analysis of top tax rates since 1945. And I would encourage you to go look it up and read it thoroughly and then come back with any comments that you may have. And, Jonathan Paton, I will certainly send you the link if you're truly interested in reviewing it. I expect that you really are interested in looking at it, so we will do that, but I don't want to belabor that point too much. Jonathan, we have one more question here from Facebook. And it goes back to kind of what's been going on with these campaigns. They've been getting extremely personal in nature, and you see a lot of outside money coming in on both sides of the aisle, and the attack ads, leveled at you and then leveled at your opponent. Do you have any response to any of those ads that I feel are blanketing our airwaves? And I want to give you a chance to respond to the allegation that you were a lobbyist for the payday industry. Do you have any comment or anything to say about that?
Absolutely. What I'll say is this: I ran a charity in 2003, so it was quite a long time ago. That the charity was basically took money from the industry and used that for scholarships for kids. I registered in order to be able to, because I interacted with lawmakers. We wanted to make sure that there was everything was above board, and every time you interface with lawmakers, you want to make sure everything is disclosed. I did not lobby them on legislation, anything like that. They were the people who judged the scholarship applicants. They did essays, and from that, she has built her entire campaign around. And here's my response to it. In every single district in which the numbers for the president are underwater, the Democratic Campaign Congressional Committee, the DCCC as we call them, have used character attacks. Every other race in which the president is doing well, they use the issue of Medicare and Social Security. If you can find an actual issue in any of those attack ads. Nothing to do with her votes, nothing really to do with my votes. Very little. And I think that's why we're ahead in all the polling data that comes out, because people really look at this as a referendum on the last 4 years. They want someone who's going to be a check and a balance on any president who's in office, and I think that's why we're winning. We did polling at the beginning of the ad buys from both sides, and we were 5 points behind. We disclosed that to everyone, that we were 5 points behind in the polling, and now 3 or 4 polls have come out, including those put on by the Democrats, and we're 5 or 6 points ahead. I think the reason is that people don't like the tenor of those ads. They don't feel that they're relevant, and they feel like they're deceitful. We have several different media sources that have found, including the Arizona Daily Sun, which said that there was no proof to the things that she was saying. So that's my response to it.
Jonathan Paton, we are unfortunately out of time. We need to go to a break, but I want to give you, sir, an opportunity to make your closing statement. We're exactly 1 week away from Election Day, and folks here throughout the massive amount of geography that is CD1, Congressional District Number 1, that covers not just northern Arizona, but a whole lot of the state, quite frankly, are about to make their decision. And this is a big race. A lot of money's been invested by both campaigns, by a lot of outside support and surrogate groups. This is a very, very big race, and you get the final word today, sir, for you to make your closing argument, if you will, why people should vote for Jonathan Paton over former Congresswoman Ann Kirkpatrick.
I'll make it really simple. There's really two choices. If you look at, you can have a rubber stamp for the president's agenda or the agenda of Nancy Pelosi, or you can have a check and a balance on this president or any president. My opponent supports the president. She said, I don't want to second-guess the president. She voted with Nancy Pelosi 87% of the time. If you agree with that, then she's your candidate. If you believe that the last 4 years have been bad for the country, and you believe that we should have a check and a balance on the executive branch of government, then I'm your candidate. And that's really what it boils down to. And that's why I'm running. That's what I believe in, and that's the oath that I swore to as a soldier and when I was a state lawmaker. And that's why I'm asking for your listeners, I'm asking for their vote.
Jonathan Paton, we will leave it at that, sir. Thank you so much for first of all, carving out a little bit of time. I know that you're heading down the home stretch and a lot of things that you need to be doing between now and Election Day, so we appreciate you joining us here on the Mitch and Joe Show.
And taking our tough questions.
And taking some tough questions. We really do, Jonathan. We wish you...
Go ahead. Here's a commitment I will make to you. I will always be willing to come on the show and answer whatever questions you have, no matter how tough they might be. I love it.
That is sincerely